Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with hosts Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you never miss an episode. Android users can find us and subscribe on your Play Music app. Apple users can find us and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Stitcher. You can follow us on Spreaker. And you can find the podcast on jimmyhinton.org and findingahealingplace.com. Please rate our show, subscribe, and share so that we can spread the word. Let's get into the show. All right, welcome to this week's podcast with Jimmy Hinton.
And Jimmy's mom, Clara.
Well, it's so good to be back. I gotta tell you, it's been an eventful week, and in a good way, in a really good way. So, let's see, I spent my birthday, which was on Monday, speaking at an abuse conference just north of us in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but that kind of is what inspired this podcast for today. And then, of course, you were away visiting family.
I was in Nashville, Tennessee.
You're always traveling, I'll tell you.
I am a traveling old lady anymore, I'll tell you, and it's
got
wonderful.
The old part, right?
Thanks, Jim. Hey, what birthday was this, young man? Old man?
I know, I'm over the hill. That was my 40th. I'm wearing black right now.
Wow. It looks great, Jim. Get used to the color.
I'm wearing my sackcloth and ashes.
Oh, no, it was great to be in Nashville. I got home last evening. Great to be back with everybody.
Well, it's good to have you back.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about what happened because it just got me to thinking about where we are and where we've come from. And I know we've had a couple of these podcasts, but I think it's important to keep renewing this and keep reminding people that we are gaining incredible ground. I'm absolutely astounded at how much ground we've covered in the last year. And how important each one of you, all of our listeners, all the people who we meet, you guys all play a really incredibly pivotal role. Every single person is important. And we all have a space to make change and to change the culture. We talk about cultural changes a lot. So I went to this event, and it was called the START event. And START is Sex Abuse Response Team, and that's for Cambria and Somerset counties. And I am part of the START team. So they're just an incredible group of advocates, and you have law enforcement. You have District Attorney Kelly Callahan, who's gotten to be a friend of mine. Actually, we're going to have her on the podcast at some point. We just haven't made that happen yet. But, there are all these incredible advocates. And at this conference, this was the 7th or 8th one that they've done. And they had by far the most people that they've ever had. And to me, that was a sign that people aren't just here for continuing ed credits. They were there because they want to be there. They were there because they were interested, and they want to learn, and they want to grow.
I was going to say they don't just want to learn. They want to be an active part of this whole movement, and that is so encouraging.
Yeah. Well, The keynote speaker, man, it was just so cool to meet him. So it was Bill Hagmaier, and Bill is the guy who interviewed Ted Bundy. So there's a Netflix series. I don't know if you've heard of it. The Ted Bundy interviews, conversations with the serial killer, Ted Bundy interviews.
Jimmy, to be honest
with you. Oh, get with it. Come on.
Your mother does not normally listen to those things, but I, in all honesty, I have seen the titles flash across on Netflix. I haven't listened though.
Yeah. So Bill, really cool guy. And, I met him as soon as I came in there. They had all of us speakers. Well, there were, I think four of us were speakers for the event. And Bill was the keynote speaker. So I got there a little bit early and walked up and was kind of talking to the speakers. And Bill, he spent, I think it was the last several weeks with Ted Bundy before he was executed. And Bill is the one who Ted Bundy confessed to. Because I don't know if you remember, of course, I was so young that I wouldn't have remembered this. But you, on the other hand.
Actually, believe it or not, I did follow the Ted Bundy case.
Well, if you remember, he pled innocent.
He did.
And he was trying to get out of...
remember.
He was trying desperately to get out of being executed. He didn't want to go on death row. And so he pled innocent, which really messed everything up. So Bill is the one who got him to change his plea back to guilty. He confessed to Bill, but then not only that, Bill was spending all this time with him, and Ted Bundy started profiling other serial murderers. And Bill was like the leading investigator in the country on these high-profile serial murders. And Ted Bundy was helping him out. And he was like, if I were him, I would go back to the scene, and, serial killers, they behave this way, and they go back to the scene, and they do this, and they tamper with evidence. They leave evidence behind that has nothing to do with the murder, just to throw people off. So Bill's the one who uncovered all that. And, to be able to meet him was such a high honor. But what really stuck out to me is, I don't think he knew who I was. But he shook my hand anyway, and he said, "I just want to thank you for what you're doing." And he's like, "Keep doing this."
What a huge encouragement that is.
Yeah. And that, as I looked out at this audience, I thought, what set our training apart a little bit, and what I try to do with my training is, you get a whole community to come together. I'm trying to break down these stereotypes where church leaders or the police or whoever, they're the only ones who can actually make decisions, and they can intervene, and they can stop abusers. That's simply not true. And it takes a community, and we need to really harness that community. And so I'm so encouraged by the listeners, and, especially with starting our Patreon. So if you you can either go to my website. I don't think we have that on yours yet. We have the podcast, but not the link to Patreon.
Yeah.
So, we had talked about this a lot, whether we were going to take up sponsors and advertisers and things like that. And pretty quickly we decided that we didn't want to do that because it's just so impersonal. And we have thousands of people that listen to this podcast across the world. And we're completely humbled by that. And this isn't something that we do and we're just like, yeah, we're going to grow this podcast. We do this because we really want to stop abusers. We hate abuse. And we need people. We need people. We need people to be equipped, to be able to confront abusers, to be able to intervene. And so when I hear stories from listeners about how, hey, I heard this episode, and I just want you to know that I went up and I exposed my church leaders for covering up abuse. We hear things like that all the time. You guys are incredible. Do you realize how much you're changing the world right now? And I think a lot of people just feel like they're so insignificant, and you're not. Or you feel like the work that you're doing is insignificant, and
I
it's not.
like what you said, Jimmy, about each person has a place in this. And each and every person does. Jimmy receives by far many more emails every week than I do, partly because he has just saturated the world with his teachings and with his findings, with speaking. I have not been able to do that. Jimmy is definitely out there. But the emails that I do receive, and I do receive emails and messages weekly, are both humbling and so encouraging to think that people are listening, but they're not just listening, they're acting, they're learning, and they're helping stop this abuse. And that's the purpose of the podcast.
Yeah.
That I loved what you said a few minutes back, that we didn't sit together and say, let's start this podcast and let's grow it big. Never once did you and I ever say that.
Well, we didn't even know how long we were going to do it for. When we first stared doing it, I had asked you, and a big reason is just because I understand the value in community. Maybe that's because I'm mostly an extrovert. I don't like just talking into a microphone by myself. I need human interaction.
Right. And so do I.
But the other part of that is, you were the first person I thought of because it was you who I went to, and for you, it was me who you went to. You know, whenever this all first started unfolding, you and I were the ones who walked into the police station together. Right. So we've been together from the very beginning.
Yes, we have.
And, you know, here I am, 40 years old, and I hang out with my mom every week, you know? And
this is sad.
I know. I'm wearing you out, huh? But you know, to me, that's really cool, and it just shows that when you're in the trenches together, and when you fight evil together, and when you're dealing with crises together, you have to band together. You have to become closer, because if you don't become closer, you're going to split apart. And unfortunately, that happens to so many people. And they get so isolated, and churches isolate them. It breaks my heart and makes me so angry every time that I hear survivors are treated poorly by church leaders, or they're kicked out of churches. We just started live streaming our church services a few weeks ago. The amount of survivors that listen to those, that tune in live because they have no safe place to go, it's astounding. And it breaks my heart, because survivors are the most valuable and valued assets that the church has. And for the church leaders to throw them to the curb and to make them feel alienated and isolated, I think we're doing a major disservice not only to them, but we're enabling abuse when we do that. And so we want to bring people together.
I just got back, as I said, from Nashville. And I had a purpose in mind, and that mind was to give some encouragement to my daughter and son-in-law and my son, who were in an accident in Haiti doing mission work. When I left, and I was on the plane yesterday, my mind was just circling with thoughts and with, recapping and reviewing and reminiscing already what had transpired in just a few days. And one thing came to mind, and that is the wounded were together, the wounded...
and they served each other.
And it was the most beautiful thing, Jimmy, to see within the Riverwood Church, to see how they surrounded those who were wounded and just loved on them, encouraged them. And for me to witness that and actually be part of that community, I came back super encouraged, I have to tell you. And my message to my daughter and son-in-law and son was, don't rush this whole thing. Be healed. Let people love you. Let people spend time with you. You need that community. And that's what Jimmy and I are trying to build here. That type of community where the wounded come together, but there is a purpose. There is a building up. There is an encouragement. There is a message that's clear that we want to send. And that message is always stronger coming from the heart of those who have been wounded.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking right now. I just pulled up our patrons that we have so far, and we've only had Patreon for probably 3 weeks now.
I think going on.
And we already have 22 patrons. We set a goal of 250, which, by the way, when we reach our goal of 250, Mom and I are going to sponsor a party for those 250 patrons. For any of you who can travel to Pennsylvania, We don't know yet whether we'll do something in Pittsburgh or at one of our ski resorts. We have 2 ski resorts that are kind of in between here in Pittsburgh that are beautiful. We may rent a room out, and we just want to spend a day together. We just want to hang out. We want to laugh. We want to have a good time and get to know our patrons.
I was going to say, and just get to know each of you.
But I'm looking through the patrons here and people who are financially supporting our podcast, but they're not just financial supporters. Like, the cool thing about Patreon is, you guys are part of this community. You guys are teaching us. You guys are helping us. We're going to be doing the live Q&As. We're going to get together and have question and answer time once a month for some of the patrons. We do an exclusive once a month podcast that's just for the patrons, and that's kind of more to get to know us. It's a lighthearted. I had fun recording that last one, but it's just a lighthearted, fun get to know us on a deeper level, because we want to know you guys and we want you to know us. But I'm looking through these names, and the majority of the names on here, these are people who I not only know, but who have really held my head up in really dark times. And I'm going to name some of these. They're on the website, so we list our patrons on the website unless they tell us that they don't want to be listed. But I don't have time to mention everybody, but just some of the ones like Denise Wilson. Like, you have no idea how much of an encouragement you've been to me. And I don't know, just some of the stuff, volunteering your time, offering to do that, and just always dropping a note of encouragement. Like, that's really cool. Di Harris, you have inspired us on so many levels. And Di was just actually, ironically, you're going to probably smack me for this as you're sitting here. She was in Nashville at the same time as you.
Oh, Jimmy.
And I was completely overwhelmed and tied up, and I didn't get a chance to text you. But don't worry, Di, we will get together. Okay. I promise. But Di she is a superhero. You are just absolutely awesome. What an encouragement. And she's offered constructive criticism on our podcast and has helped us tremendously to improve it. So never be afraid to tell us if there's something that you don't like, or if there's something that we say that could be worded differently, or a subject that maybe we didn't cover it well. Please let us know. Katie Amber, like, you rock. We've been talking a lot lately, and you inspire me and you encourage me.
Well, I was going to say, Jimmy, we went down the entire list prior to recording this podcast. Each and every person, and these are only the ones that are listed here. Yeah. This doesn't begin to name the people who have offered us encouragement
and influenced us.
Part of this wonderful community.
Yeah, hundreds of people.
And every person is so important and has that place of importance among this community.
Yeah. And I gotta give a shout out to the Kellys, because I just saw Kelly Downing. I just commented to you right before Mom and I started recording. Kelly Downing, also, if you know anything about her story, just incredible. You are an incredible person of courage, and you published a podcast. You started a podcast with survivors, and your guest today was Kelly Haynes, another one of our heroes.
Awesome.
And Kelly Haynes actually came to Somerset, and we got to spend time with you, and that was so cool. I'm still encouraged by that visit. Christine Parker happened to be up here at the same time, so we had it was like a big reunion, and just getting to know people who we've talked to and cried with and prayed for, and they've prayed for us, and on and on and on. I look down through this list. Noel Young, my brother-in-law. Sitting right in front of us is Mary DeMuth's book, We Too, which, by the way, this book is absolutely a game changer. This book is phenomenal. And it's not just because she put her heart and soul into this. This genuinely is going to cause cultural change within the church.
Yes.
Absolutely, hands down.
Yes.
I was completely humbled that, Mary, that you dedicated this book to both Mom and I. I'm pinching myself.
Same
and I'm
here.
saying we
Well,
don't deserve that. We don't deserve that kind of dedication. But a little interesting tidbit, Noel, my brother-in-law, who is a patron of this podcast, he's just one of those quiet people who, he observes, he listens, he reads, he learns, and he makes connections. And Noel is the one who connected Mary and I. So Mary, I don't know if you know that, but Noel is the one who reached out to me several years ago and said, hey, there's this author who's an abuse survivor, and, she's been doing this for a long time, and she might just be somebody that you want to connect with. And so I did. I reached out to Mary, and we just introduced each other. We talked on the phone for a little bit, and not having any idea where that relationship would go. It was just connecting. It was networking. Mm-hmm. That's what we do in advocacy. And look at how she's influenced me tremendously. And you, I'm sure, no doubt, and so many other people.
I've not met Mary in person, but we've spoken on the phone.
I have. Mary's great.
We have messaged back and forth. Precious is what I would call her. Precious.
So, Sue Ankney, man, you are a rock star too. Sue is one of my, I don't want to say former church members, because you're not a former church member. You're one of my church members who now happens to live out west. And when we live stream our church service, Sue's right there with us. Dee Parsons over at the Wartburg Watch wrote a phenomenal story on Sue's abuse background, and being abused by a family member who then went into ministry pretty recently. Dee Parsons just did a great job, did that story great justice. And Sue, I just smiled from ear to ear the other day. I saw Sue signed on as a patron of the podcast. Mm-hmm. So these are not just random people who we're taking your dollars and, we're running to the bank and laughing. And that's not what this is. And by the way, if you notice the sound quality improved, we're using 2 very good microphones that were purchased because our patrons are supporting this podcast. We couldn't afford these on our own. We live in a very impoverished community, and I know, Mom, you work a few jobs. We're not going to talk about it. We're not going to talk about it. And so we just, this is not only a labor of love. We genuinely want to build community and lock arms with people who are changing the world, and we're seeing that happen. I serve with Pennsylvanians United to Protect Children. We're just past the 1-year anniversary of the release of the Pennsylvania Grand Jury Report. And 1 year later, I look at how far we've come, and I serve with Pennsylvanians United, with Sean Doherty, with Mike McDonald, with so many incredible people who they're abuse survivors and they're advocates.
When you think about it, Jimmy, it isn't too long ago that none of the names you mentioned were recognizable.
No.
And now...
Yeah, turn on the national news and you'll see Sean Doherty. Our buddy Sean is very outspoken.
All over. I can't help but think that God's hand is just in the midst of all of this and just connecting so many dots. This podcast is one arm of being the connection of connecting people, just one of many, ways people are being connected. But I just feel that God is in our midst with all of us and just working all the time through each of us, connecting us, weaving a beautiful pattern. Yeah. What that end result and pattern will look like, we don't know, but I know it's going to be beautiful, vibrant, and strong.
Yeah.
And I'm excited about it.
Yeah.
Super excited.
Yeah. And, I think for the people who are working hard and who feel, you felt alienated and isolated and lonely and tired for so long, we want you to know that we notice you. That, and it's not just that we notice you and kind of passively wave as we walk by. Like, you guys influence us. You guys teach us. You instruct us. And we instruct each other. And there's no room for people to push other people aside and say, well, I'm the expert. You need to learn from me.
No.
I don't think either one of us feels that way.
Never.
No.
No.
We're just a couple of fish who are in the same pond as everybody else.
Right.
And we're all in this together. And, if anything, I said this when I was being interviewed by the media a couple days ago at this conference. He said, your training is it's really specialized. And he's like, it's definitely different than the traditional training on abuse. And he said, how many other people are doing trainings or replicating what you're doing? And I said, I don't know that anybody really is replicating what I'm doing per se. But I said, the thing that I'm really encouraged by is that more and more survivors are becoming advocates, and they're training churches and they're training schools. And, you have Lauren Book, who she's a senator in Florida now.
She's amazing.
She has Lauren's kids.
Yeah.
You have
wow.
Sean Doherty. Sean is running for Senate in Pennsylvania. Sean, good friend of mine, and I serve with him at Pennsylvanians United to Protect Children. He's running for Senate. You have Representative Mark Rossi, who wrote the statute of limitations bill in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
He's an abuse survivor.
Yeah.
You have these survivors. You have Ashley Easter, who she just really encourages me. She's training people. People are going into ministry who are survivors. Instead of rolling over and saying, oh my goodness, isn't it a shame the church is broken? And we have all these layers of abuse and abusive leadership and abuse of power and all that stuff. Instead of doing that, they're saying, you know what? Like, I can do something about it.
Right. It's exciting because God is very much a part of this whole movement. God is weaving, like I said, this beautiful, beautiful, powerful cloth, so to speak, that is going to cover the whole earth of abuse. And I think it's going to be, we know we can't wipe abuse out totally, but we sure can put a halt to it. And I think we are going to see that in not too many more years, Jimmy.
I took the boys on a bike ride yesterday, and we crossed a stream, and we got off the bikes, and they were looking over the edge of the stream, and I told them, I was like, this little creek, it dumps into the Mississippi, and eventually this goes into the ocean, goes into the Gulf of Mexico. And they were just so fascinated, and they had never heard that concept before. They're 5 and 4 years old. And so they were asking all kinds of questions about how that works and how the water joins up with other water, and isn't the Mississippi River huge? And I don't want to go in the Mississippi because it's such a big river, it would sweep me away. And they're picturing this in their mind, and I'm thinking, this right now is such a metaphor for what's going on, because we have all these little trickles of people who are networking and survivors who are speaking up, and churches that are being forced to make changes, and even the media. Like, the media has been absolutely just so kind and compassionate. I spoke to a reporter just the other day who's working on a pretty big story, actually with the church that I was involved with, trying to help. Some people take your help, some don't. But the media has been such an important part of this equation. And you have all these little trickles and they're merging together in this beautiful way, and it's gaining speed and it's gaining momentum. And so, I picture this cascading stream that turns into a creek, and eventually it just turns into this big unstoppable waterfall. And when you step back and look at it, step away from the force and the power of that, you see the beauty of it too.
It's a great word picture. I love it.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So I really think that's what's going on right now. And we can't thank all of our listeners enough for all the people who share this podcast, for the people who share it with your church leaders, with your friends, with your family, for all of our patrons who've joined, for all of you who are thinking about joining as patrons. We can't thank you guys enough. And I guess our truth bomb is just keep at it and know that change is happening, and it's good change, it's positive change, and you guys are making all the difference in the world. Thanks for tuning in this week, and we'll catch you next round.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode of the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast. Thank you to our patrons who make this podcast possible. If you found it helpful, please follow on Spreaker, subscribe on Google Play Music, Apple Podcast, or Stitcher. If you believe in what we do, consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron, and check out the cool rewards our patrons receive. Share with your friends and tell the world. Join us in speaking out on sex abuse so we can change the tides and prevent abuse.